So to kick off our session today, we have McInerney from Imperial College London, who will share practical tips developed through a global collaboration on how to ensure your software remains useful and maintainable long after you've left the project. Let's welcome Ian.
Well, I should pick up from here. So, as mentioned, I'm Ian McInerney. This is in a larger scope of work, though, with people from all across the globe. There's a couple more people here. Richard and Dan are in the audience. Claire, unfortunately, is leading a BOF actually at this time on open source and academia. So she couldn't be here, but she's also one of the collaborators on here. But basically, we're talking about how can you make your software outlive your current job? Because in academia, we have this problem where life tends to be very uncertain, especially if you're early career researchers or PhD students, because funding changes. You're typically on soft funding. You don't have contracts longer than a year or two. And the problem right now, especially in this current climate, is national and international funding is becoming at risk. And so the idea behind this is, in academia and research software, we should try and make sure our open source software is more resilient, because it will last longer if you care about it lasting longer. And so what we've done is we put together kind of a 10 simple tips, and there's a link, a QR code for a paper at the end. And I'm just going to kind of walk through those 10 tips. So the first one is, of course, stay within the law. You have to be aware of what your university policies are, departmental policies, funder requirements, and what their rules are for making something open source. But also, if you're moving jobs, you have to find out what the policies are in your next job. If you're jumping from academia to industry, they might have clauses in your contract about intellectual property. They might care about if you continue to work on stuff in your previous job. So you might need to start negotiating the ability to actually continue working on these projects that you've been participating in as a student or postdoc. So you should definitely keep that in mind if you're transitioning to a new position. The next one we kind of called your threat model is figuring out at what level could this disruption come from. For instance, as an individual, is it you moving jobs, like you're a postdoc and you have a project that's following you from job to job? Is it more of an institutional problem where maybe entire departments are going through redundancies right now? Or kind of a global one where your data might be at risk or the entire field might be at risk due to the political or other climates? So it's kind of figuring out at what level of resiliency do you need to scope your work and try and make sure you're resilient to that. And then the bigger question now is, are you going to be ending the project, passing it off to someone, or pausing it? This usually is determined by what your funding is or how kind of what the outlook is. With pausing it, if you think you're just in between grants, handing it off, it might be if it's a long-running project in a research lab and you're handing it off to the next postdoc, or just ending it. So like, for instance, if you have to move to industry and you can no longer work on the project, you might have to actually end the project. So you have to decide kind of what you're doing and signpost that. Make it obvious to people exactly kind of that, is this maintained, is this unmaintained, or is it best effort? An important one, especially when talking about open source, as we heard earlier in the keynote, choose a license and choose an open license if you can, again, staying within the law and your policies. Release software should have a clear license. Do not write your own. That's the first big thing. And also, I see a lot of people talking about this public domain. That is actually a very murky subject that you should not rely on. You should always make sure you have a core license that you use, something from, for instance, that's an OSI approved license or from an approved list. And you should choose it based upon, first of all, does your employer or university recommend one or require one even? Is there a standard license in the ecosystem? For instance, one of the ones I work with, Julia, a lot of packages are MIT licensed. So that's kind of a standard license that people will put onto them. Another key one is, do you want industry users or collaborators? Because if you do, you might not need to go full GPL, but you might want to stay closer to the BSD ecosystem or something like that. That's something that you might need to talk to, so for instance, a university commercialization team or someone like that with more expertise in licensing. There's plenty of other online kind of resources for this, but you can choose one. The other big one is save everything in multiple places. Make sure you have copies of it. GitHub, GitLab, they're all online services run by companies. Bitbucket, another company. Codeberg is more federated open source, but you should also archive releases. So Zenodo and Figshare are two popular ones, but even your personal website. The other one is don't rely on your institution's platforms and logins. Those are tied usually to your institution or your email, so you would lose access if you have to leave your job, or it makes it more kind of tied to that and on your personal brand almost. Another one to kind of build up, and maybe if you want to continue the project going so you can even pass it off, is to encourage community adoption. And a big one here is, as academics, we have to kind of wrap our heads around is publishing is not the same as publicizing. To publicize a project, you really should be looking at social media, discussion forums, newsletters and mailing lists, telling people about the project, new releases of it, new features, things like that, to make it known and make people realize that it's still being actively developed. That's a good way to get new users and new developers in there to help you with it so you can potentially pass it off to them or grow the community outside of just your team or institution. Another good one is to give tutorials on it. So that will encourage users to adopt it. And that can be done at conferences or workshops in your field. These next ones are kind of what we're always doing as an RSC, kind of our bread and butter, is do what you're supposed to do in terms of making sure it's archived with Zenodo, for instance, being a DOI. You can get peer review of your software through submitting it to journals like JOS or JORS. The SSI even does evaluations for open source academic software. Building documentation of how to use it, what are the dependencies, writing simple tests, and how to contribute. If you have to act quickly, just doing some simple documentation will make it easier to come back at the later on, possibly, if you have to take a break from it. Making screencasts are very easy. You can open up Teams or Zoom or something, just record it. You can use closed captions to make it accessible. Cleaning up the code. And then the big one, though, documenting the status. Just in the README, say, is it maintained? Is it archived? You can say why. Is it best effort support? Things like that. Like if you're encouraging pull requests, but it might take you a couple of days to get back to them, kind of set expectations that they're not going to hear something right away. That's an important one for growing the community. Another one is more talking about what you're doing beyond the code. So this can be conversations with colleagues, social media. This is kind of things that might have worked in growing the community, might not have worked. Write down kind of what is happening and kind of process this on your own. As RSCs, there's a big movement now for our mental health and to try and make sure that we can be supported throughout this. And this is one way of doing that, processing and figuring out what is going on. So outside the code, this is just for processing and moving on. Another one, advocacy and organization. We heard, Open UK as an organization that's trying to push for open source in the UK this morning, but there's other ones, your professional societies, other initiatives, academic boards, otherwise, basically finding a community that you can work with, organize, try and make the case to either funders or other groups to preserve the software and to maybe even get more funding and a funding stream. So with that, I will leave you with a QR code that takes you to a link of a paper that has all these on it. These are the 10 quick tips that we just showed. There's a lot more in there. I encourage you to go out, read the paper. This is actually the kind of thing that you should probably even share around with academics that you work with as an RSC, that you consult with. It's something that kind of is good for them, especially as they're growing a career as a postdoc or PhD student. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Are we going to get the Slido up? Okay, so there's one question in at the moment. It says, when I want to produce something actually useful, I do so outside working hours in my own GitHub account with an OSS license. Then if an employer wants to use it, they can't insist on gaining admin permission or removing my access when I leave. Thoughts?
So this, I think, is going to come down to a lot of what is your employment contract, unfortunately. If you're academic, it tends to be a bit more flexible. If you're someone in industry, they might have actual clauses about IP even outside of employment hours. So it becomes a bit more difficult in terms of you have to know your contract. I think this is something that if you can do it outside your hours, do it. If it's on your own account, the other thing here is build a community behind it. If you have more than just you, it gives a stronger legal standing for a more distributed copyright on there. So for instance, if you have collaborators or contributors from somewhere else, they would then have part of the copyright, and you cannot just be forced into giving it up. They also have to agree to it. So it kind of builds a stronger network and safety net, essentially.
Thank you. So the next one is, which of these steps do you find is the biggest stumbling block for researchers?
I would think there's probably a couple. The first one might just be getting it out there. So the publishing is not publicizing. A lot of academics think publishing is kind of the output that you should get and don't go further than that. So I think that one's kind of a big one of trying to go social media now, but also just conferences, newsletters, and trying to get the word out about the project.
And this is a good one. How do you determine when your software should outlive your job versus when it should be sunset?
That is a good question. I think it kind of depends maybe on what is your reason for doing it and how invested are you in it. If it's something that you are very invested in, that you could see yourself really wanting to continue, then it's something that you should probably put the effort in to try and make sure it outlasts. If it's something that maybe you were assigned and you built up a piece of code that works, it's good, but you want to change research directions, then it might be time to think of sunsetting the code or passing it off to someone else, because it might not be where your passion is. And if you're not going to be doing it in your job anymore, you really should probably have a passion for it. And that's kind of where the open source community would come in.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think there's one that's just snuck in. Any tips for getting established academics nearing retirement, maintaining big legacy codes on board with it?
That is harder. I'm not quite sure, actually. I think it might just be you have to take small steps with them and try and build it up. That might be something where you slowly introduce things like releases on Zenodo, getting it out in public, even on GitHub or something like that, if it's an established code, and maybe try and get postdocs that want to continue it after they finish. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian. We're going to move on to the next talk.